This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for the Intentionality Gurus. And as I'm listening to my voice, I'm saying, who's that person talking? Today, we're going to be discussing flip the switch from threat to challenge response. So,
It
yeah.
sounds like they may be the same thing, though, doesn't it?
Well, a threat and a challenge could be the same, but it could be different as well.
Yeah, so the idea is that, most of us are just marinating in stress chemicals. We've got headlines coming at us, deadlines, other people needing things, just you name it, just it's daily life. And we can accept that as daily life and not try to navigate it more intentionally.
Okay.
All right. And so the idea is when we are feeling bombarded, when the day just, I call it getting caught up in the riptide of life, that can be perceived as a threat by our body. And then that is releasing all these stress chemicals. And the stress chemicals can just really create havoc in our bodies and our mindset. And in fact, the science shows that the constant stress and the feeling of being under siege, under threat, can actually reduce the size of our hippocampus, a part of the brain that is designed to kind of put the brake on our startle response.
Okay.
All right. So we all have the amygdala, which is part of our fight, flight, or freeze instinct. And the hippocampus, if that's amygdala is constantly being triggered, well, then the chemical reactions in the mind, in the brain, are eventually taking a toll on the hippocampus. So then we lose our ability, the natural ability to put the brake on, to say, okay, no, you don't have to be startled by this all the time. So it's just makes it worse and worse. And we've talked about it before. I have a news issue that it's some compulsion of mine. I just need to, stop in for a little bit, and then of course it becomes watching it too much. But the more we can be aware of the toll these things that hijack us are taking on us physically and emotionally, then we can look for ways to switch out of it. And so that's what we're going to explore very briefly today.
Well, and I actually need this week because I've been in the process of changing all of our shows to a new format. And part of the process worked really well for one group of shows. And since then, I've been having a problem transferring other shows over. And so I've been very challenged, but as I'm being challenged, I feel like I know nothing about using a computer or software or anything. I mean, it just has taken its toll on me.
So you feel like I do every day when it comes to technology, but you have much more experience with it. So it must be more threatening to you in a way because you're used to being able to navigate some of those things.
Exactly. And it's funny because I called up somebody who I thought could help me out. And their comment was, "Oh, come on, Karen, you can do it." And I said, if I could do it, I would be doing it. I either need, just a support, on my hand to say, this is going to work, or somebody to show me what I'm doing wrong because I'm not accomplishing what I need to accomplish. So yeah, that's been the tough part.
Yeah, and then the angst that we have associated with we're not getting it, we're not getting, moving it forward, and those kinds of things can take its toll as well.
Right.
And so, it's a perfect example. And these may be seemingly minor things, like, oh yeah, just get over it. It's, you have to deal with this from time to time. And yeah, that's true. But even those little micro challenges, I'm going to try not to substitute challenges for threats, because in this conversation, they're going to mean separate things. But even those upsets are taking a toll on us. And we don't have to eradicate them all. We just need to have a sense of balance and ability to not have all of them trigger us, or most of them trigger us,
Right.
I should say. So this material comes from lots of different places, but I was reminded of it because of, Brian Johnson, who I follow, and he was talking about a lot of these things. And then it reminded me of some other readings I've done. But basically, the premise is that fear exhausts energy. So, we talk about threats, and it doesn't have to be full on fear, but some stressor is occurring. And that's just, in our today's society, that's a given.
Right.
All right. So it's reducing our energy, which in turn reduces our willpower. So it isn't just mind over matter. Like, just get over it, Candy.
Yeah.
Or don't be afraid of the dark. Oh,
Yeah.
gee, I'm 5 years old and somebody says, don't be afraid of the dark. Oh, yeah, that works for me. It's just, what was I thinking? All right. So it's when we allow the fear to dominate our thinking, or the threats to dominate our thinking, in terms of a sense maybe of hopelessness, or I can't get on the other side of this, and so on. And, with technology is one of those things. And very often watching the news, particularly when we have, upsetting things like the war in Ukraine, those kinds of things. So the idea here is this isn't going to be possible all of the time to catch ourselves in the act, but we can start to notice when we have that sense of, that stomach girding sensation of, oh, this is really frustrating me. And then, the flipping the switch has to do with, one, noticing, two, catching ourselves with the specific physical sensation, and then thinking through, how can I make this a challenge, like a game? And it doesn't have to be something big, and it doesn't have to be the whole threat. It could be just one thing. And it might mean maybe I could do some little mantra to myself, say, all right, calm down, calm down. It might be rubbing two fingers together, and you'll understand the merits of that. And it might be, I don't know, doing a jig. I mean, what other things could you do that would just break that cycle?
Well, it's interesting because beginning of the week, we did a podcast on laugh yoga, and it's really not yoga, but it's, a relaxation. And it also changes your mindset. And that's what I've been doing all week long when I, been working on this project. Things work, and I'm feeling really good about it. And then things don't work, and I start getting frustrated. And I'm then, producing a laugh, like, haha, okay, you're not winning, because eventually I'll get it figured out. Either I'm going to do it, or I'll hire somebody to do it for me. And so those little moments of laughing it out have really helped. And I've got my family laughing, and they have no idea what they're laughing about. So that's a good thing too.
Well, I love that, because there's a whole bunch of other science behind that. I've talked about the Amy Cuddy, Cuddy, TED Talk, and it was a researcher, and she has written books and so on, but the TED Talk is just fabulous. I think it was in April or October of 2012, but I watch it every once in a while just to be reminded. And she talks about body language, and we know about body language when we observe others, how we might impact others with our body language, or how they would perceive us. But her research was on how it changes us. And so, you have to watch it in order to truly appreciate it. But one of the things she talks about briefly, either in her writings or in the TED Talk, is if you put a pencil between your teeth, it will cause your facial expression to mimic a smile. You're not smiling,
Oh,
but your body is perceiving it as such.
okay. Yeah.
Even something like that can apparently switch a mood. And then that, if the mood is, something that is stressful, well, obviously we're releasing stress chemicals, adrenaline and other chemicals in the body. And if the mood is more pleasant, then we might be releasing serotonin and some of the endorphins and so on. And I'm not a neuroscientist. This is my layperson's reading and studying this stuff for a number of years. But the idea that Kelly McGonigal talks about is that, she wrote in the book Upside of Stress, we can learn to harness those things and convert them in essence into something that is one more beneficial, but also can help us accomplish a better outcome. So one, we're going to be marinating less in our stress chemicals, and we can identify an element of we can start looking at whatever that so-called threat is as a challenge, kind of like a game. And what is one thing we could do either in the moment or soon that could incrementally change it, not the whole thing necessarily. So let's just use the technology thing. So one thing that might make it better would be to stand up and leave the room and come back in and sit down again.
Right.
So that's so her advice and research has shown that the way we construct the challenge to turn the threat into something beneficial, or at least less threatening, is to break it down into some step that we are capable of doing. Right. So taking apart the computer and putting it back together again would not be, my skill set.
No, mine either.
But I know people who can do that.
Yep, exactly.
So anything you can think of in terms
of it's interesting because I think I brought this up before, especially when it comes to technology. If I have a question, I ask my husband. Recently, he's been saying he doesn't have the answer, which, sort of shocks me. But then I'll try to reword it. And if he still doesn't know what I'm talking about or says he can't help me, I have turned it into a challenge of, well, I'm going to find the information. And when I then go and tell him what I found, he'll say, yeah, I knew you could do it. Meaning he had the answer for me all along.
He's been withholding?
Yeah, he withholds them. And as he's pointed out to me, he said, for too many years of my life, I had people around me who were convincing me that I wasn't smart enough to do whatever I was doing. And Rich, from the first day I met him, he's been my biggest cheerleader. Well, you can do it. And he doesn't expect perfection, but he knows that I can do these things, that come up and, typically would have threatened me. Today, I've learned how to twist them into challenges. And it's not to say I twist all of them that way, but quite a few, because I don't like walking around with lead weight on my shoulders.
Yeah, I just love that he allows you to do it. And perfection it doesn't have to be perfect. So he doesn't micromanage you.
Right.
And, it sets you up so that it's easier to have that learn initiative and so on. Because when we reach that frustration level, we're running out of cope. And sometimes, no matter, even if somebody gives us the answer, sometimes it doesn't compute in our brains, or by that point, something really simple, like you can't find a pencil, like totally puts you over the edge.
Right.
So, whether we come out victoriously or not with the challenge, it's the idea of, flipping the switch on how we're perceiving this thing that initially we're thinking of as a threat, or not even thinking, just physically reacting to on some level that it's a threat, and then getting caught up in that quagmire and spiraling down. So going into the week or the weekend, what are the things that are likely to maybe qualify as threats that might be changed into challenges?
Well, I have no control over it, but the weather this weekend, I should never watch weather reports because I think they scare me more than world news. I hate wind, and we're going to supposedly have high winds.
Well, I was talking to somebody in Utah yesterday, and I coach people in this
Yep.
city in Utah, and he said they were down into the high 20s, low 30s, and had major snowstorms.
Oh,
He's in the suburb of Salt Lake or something. Of course, they have a much higher elevation, but
right.
he said, and it's on its way to you.
Well,
Thank you very much.
yeah. And those are the things that, stress me out. I mean, if it's just rain or just snow, not storms, I may not like it, but it's like, no big deal. I'll figure out a way. But when I hear 50 to 60 mile an hour winds,
Yeah, those are
the sound of wind just like irritates me. And so hearing that yesterday, what the weather was supposed to be like, Rich and I have plans for tomorrow night. And I had to sort of like start telling myself it's going to be okay. I'm going to be with Rich. We're going to be safe. But I hate driving in any bad weather, and especially windy weather. So I'm looking at it as my challenge because it's not going to hurt me when I face it. It's just something I got to do because the outcome will be good. So,
yeah, but I have to admit, I share that concern after Hurricane Sandy. How many years ago was that? And
right.
the kinds of winds we had in my neighborhood, we had some 100-year-old oak trees tip over, and it was mostly from the combination of the saturation of the water, all the rain, just made the ground looser.
Right.
But then with the wind, and if we got that wind force here, I can't imagine what it was like on the East Coast, but just that really startled me, kind of scarred me in a way. Like, oh, see, it can happen here. Because,
Yeah.
as much as Cleveland gets a bad rap, we don't tend to float away, burn away, whatever, shake away, get eaten away by, little locusts and things.
Right.
And or basically bake away with the high temperatures. And yeah, we have snow, but we really haven't had much. I mean, look how far into the year we are.
Right.
And well, now I'm going to cause it to probably snow this weekend as well, a freak snowstorm. But the point is that, yeah, but we can prepare for those things ahead of time and not get caught off guard. Those things are a given, and there's, to the extent we've talked about it before, lessening the bombardment we have. That's a really hard one for me with the darn news.
Right.
Lessening the bombardment then can mean that our set point on how easily we feel threatened or stimulate those stress chemicals can in time spiral down, so that we won't have a hair trigger on, oh gee, what's that noise, or oh gee, this is going to be a catastrophe.
Yep.
So I just thought it would be important, particularly as we're starting to ramp up for the holidays and so on, to kind of set the baseline for, we have control. It's not a sense of this is happening to us and we're totally powerless or even just unconscious in terms of what's happening to us, and to recognize the toll those stress chemicals have on us. I mean, literally, physically, it can change some of our physiology in terms of some of the brain functions. I mean, that when I read about the hippocampus atrophying because of the stress chemicals constantly bombarding it, it's a frightening thing.
Yeah.
I don't like parts of my brain atrophying.
Well,
And, just that kind of noticing and being intentional.
well, in the conversation that we had the other evening in our group, um, here I am, basically no family and no have a lot of friends, but they have family.
Mhm.
So when it comes to the holidays, unless we go out of town, it's usually just the three of us. But hearing in the conversation how somebody who has all this family, but it's difficult thinking about being all together at once.
Mhm.
And as I was listening to it, I thought, you know, as much as I don't like being alone, um, in some ways, I knew this person would prefer being alone
Mhm.
because wouldn't have to deal with all those stresses. Um, and so I sort of walked away from that conversation saying to myself that, you know, I just have to create something that works for me, whether it's being in a large group or being alone. Um, and I sat down the next day and I wrote a list of, well, if I, am with family, it's nice, but what if this happens, or that happens? And I shared it with my husband because, he's never had a lot of family. And so when he goes to my family, he feels inundated by all of them as much as he loves them. Um, and he looked at it and he goes, yeah, those are the things that may happen. So how are we going to deal with those things? And we started having a conversation about it, which never have done before. I just either pull him along to be alone or pull him along to go
Mhm.
to family. He
Well,
doesn't
what I
get much.
love about that is, I mean, you're thinking ahead, anticipating it, so you're not going to be caught unaware, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a perfect example of turning what could be a threat into a challenge, because I presume, all of the plan Bs or the things that could go wrong have plan Bs around them. And that reminds me of Gabriel Adijan's research about um, the downside of positive psychology being too optimistic, but planning for what could go wrong, planning for what you want, the outcome you want, and then the specific. Um, First, it's the wish. I have to do the acronym WHOOP. So first, it's your overarching wish, and then the specific outcome. So it might be getting together for the holidays, and then what is the likely obstacle or obstacles that come into play, and then what is your game plan for dealing with the obstacles. And those things might not occur, but you're ready and not caught,
Abs-
flat-footed.
yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it's basically, I just love the way all of these different areas of research and, science, all come together for some universal concepts.
They sure do. And a lot of them, as I'm realizing, the more we do this podcast, um, are things that either I did in the past or I'm doing now, or I've changed them up. And, um, you know, and I think I can say this easily that when I was in my first marriage, every time I had to go to my in-laws' house, um, uh, I broke out in hives. I couldn't hold a decent conversation with them. Now, if my mother-in-law walked out of the room, I was absolutely fine. It's like the hives disappeared. I was great with my father-in-law. But as soon as she'd walk back in the room, I became this blubbering idiot sitting at the table. Um, and I chose, after my husband and I got divorced at the time, I chose never to put myself in a situation like that again. And I haven't. If somebody's going to make me feel that uncomfortable, um, I'll stay home. So
Yeah, so that's where you have control over one, how you feel in the presence of someone else, and then changing it up if it's not a comfortable feeling.
Right.
So kudos. Well, in my first marriage, my husband had lovely parents, but they were very controlling. And I can remember they came to visit us after we had purchased a house, and we literally had only been in, they invited themselves to the house. They lived in Pittsburgh, so it wasn't far for them to come and visit us. So they said, we're coming up this weekend. And I didn't have curtains up. I just had sheets on the windows and so on. And I didn't want those plastic pull down shades.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't have all the options we have now. And so anyway, we let them have our bedroom, and we slept in the other room, which was smaller. And we still had the sheets up, and we told them, you know, we're not ready. We still had boxes in the house and so on. And they didn't like the sheets on the windows. So his father went out and bought those plastic shades and installed them. And
Oh,
so, okay, like, what do I do with this? So I didn't want to
right.
make a scene and so on. But for a long time, I felt very manipulated by them, and it damaged our relationship, not my relationship with my husband, but with them. And consequently, when we would visit them, they moved to Florida, so they couldn't just come up every weekend. Um, I would go in the other room, and they would say to my husband, she sleeps a lot. Well, I was in there reading because it was just so darn uncomfortable
Right.
to be in the room with them. But it's so unfortunate I didn't have the insights I have now. Not that I'm totally evolved, but just incrementally, just that all of this, just paying attention to that stuff that drives a lot of the ways we think and do things.
Well, I like having the awareness, which I didn't have when I was younger, because that helps you go through your challenge a little easier.
Mhm.
And, you know, it's not always going to be perfect. There are going to be some of us spending the holiday making a choice that maybe is not the best choice for us. And others are going to have preconceived notions on, you know, what the holiday should look like. I've given up on that. There's no should. It is what it is. So
And as long as it's the quality of the relationship with others and with ourselves.
absolutely. Well, I wasn't expecting it to go in this direction. Not exactly sure where I thought it was going to go, but I hope our listeners have gained some insight. And again, in the show notes, there will be some information. And also, if you want to join us on a future podcast, you can contact us at New Cleveland Radio, and we'd love to have you on.
Well, thank you very much, Karen.
Have a great day. Bye-bye now.